All right, you ready? All right. This is a story about how I finally made it as an actor. When I had that breakthrough where I knew that I was going to finally have a career as an actor, and I'd been toiling away in Toronto for years, doing commercials and bit parts, not really getting anywhere and not having much of a reputation. And I finally got two small parts, or two actually large parts in two different independent movies, and it gave me a chance to really showcase my talent. So now I had some tape that I felt good and proud about. But nobody in Toronto cared about me. The casting directors weren't paying me much attention. But I made a decision to take these tapes, these demo tapes, and go to New York City. That was the dream. I always wanted to make it as an actor in New York City. That's where all my acting heroes started, and so I thought that would be the place that I would go. But everybody thought I was crazy. That if I wasn't making it in Toronto, how did I think I was going to make it in New York City? But I had this intuition. I had this sense that I needed to make a change, that I needed to do something a little bit different. I had to take a risk. I was also getting older. I was 27 at the time, and I was still working in a restaurant, waiting tables, which is scary when you're getting older. I had nothing to fall back on, and I knew like the time was now. And so I took that tape, and I had one meeting with one agent in New York City. A friend had turned me on to him, and I showed up, and he was willing to meet with me. I showed him the tape, and he thought it was okay. And he didn't sign me on the spot. He said, "I'm gonna send you out on an audition. We'll see how you do." And I got a job at Molivos Greek restaurant on 57th Street just to have some backup. I only had $2,000 in my pocket. I was living on this in this little room in this apartment on the Upper West Side, kind of a classic story. And I got this audition in New York, and I got the sides. The sides are like the scene that you're going to audition with. And I looked at them and I thought, okay, I can do this. And I started working on it. And then I remember I went to the casting office. I was the last person that they saw that day. It was kind of like they let me come in when everybody else was finished. Nobody knew who I was. And it was the casting director from Law and Order. And I loved Law and Order at the time. So it was a big deal for me. I'm with the casting director of Law and Order, one of my favorite shows. And it was very exciting for me. But I also knew this was it. Like if I didn't perform in this moment, I don't know if I was going to get another chance. And I sat down across from her and I started reading this scene, and it came out of me exactly the way that I'd always imagined. It was perfect. I was locked into the moment, saying everything perfectly. I was alive in the scene. I felt relaxed. I felt connected. And the casting director who was reading across from me, she was engaged with me. It was just about a 2 minute scene. And when the scene finished, she looked up at me and she said, "That was awesome." And I said, "Yeah." And I could feel everything change in that moment. It was like that scene in the Johnny Cash movie where he's playing guitar, and he's not singing so good. And then finally, his voice starts to come through. He lets it all come through. And Johnny Cash was born in that moment. That's how it felt for me. And it felt like a little miracle had happened. And yet I knew somewhere in my psyche that it was inevitable, that I'd finally arrived. The next morning, my agent calls me and he said, "What did you do at that audition?" She called every casting director in town. She told them all about you. And you have a week's full of auditions. And 2 months later, I was sitting in the casting office of NBC in New York, and they said to me, "There's three different shows, pilots for TV series, that are interested in you. which one would you like to do? Which one would I like to do? It just completely blew my mind. My whole reality was altered. And then I eventually went to LA, and that was the beginning of, what was a really successful career for me as an actor. And I thought a lot about that moment and what it meant and why. Why was I finally able to really land that scene, really connect, really let it come through? And I think in part because the pressure was on. It was do or die. And that pressure, that leverage forced me to let go. I stopped trying to control things, and I just let whatever wanted to come through me come through me. And I also felt like there was something about the courage it took to pack up where I was safe in Toronto and move to New York to go into the unknown with very little money in my pocket and not a lot of connections, and just go for it. And what it taught me about life in general is, you've heard this saying, leap and the net will appear. That you have to risk. You have to step into the unknown. If you're trying to control things, if you're trying to plan them out, if you're trying to make something happen, if you're trying to will it into being, it's not going to work. You have to be willing to trust your deep intuition despite what other people are telling you. You have to know that there's a truth that only you know. Only you know. I was the only one that knew. I trusted myself in that moment. I didn't rely on what my agents or my friends or the casting directors in Toronto were saying. There was something inside me that I knew and I trusted, and I followed it. And that's the way that I try to live my life all the time now. I don't do it perfectly, but I know when I get myself into trouble is when I don't listen to my intuition, when I don't listen to that inner guidance system. And very often that inner guidance system is in conflict with some kind of rational idea about what things are supposed to be or what they're supposed to look like or how you're supposed to do them. And that was the other thing. People ask me this all the time. They're like, what's the formula? Like, how did you make it as an actor? And I always say, I can't tell you that, because every single person who makes it, they have their own story. You have to trust that thing inside you. You have to do it your way. Yes, listen to what other people have to say, accumulate wisdom, and you want to listen to the advice. But ultimately, if you really want to make it on your own, right, on your terms, you have to follow that thing inside you, and you have to let that, whatever that inner guidance system, that innermost voice that you have inside you, you have to just follow it. And if you follow that, what I've learned is that it's always going to lead you somewhere beautiful, somewhere perfect. And it's always going to give you something that you couldn't have possibly understood or known with your rational mind. You can't plan these things out, right? You just have to trust that thing. And so I think there's power in it. I think when we take risks, when we're willing to be courageous, when we're willing to step into the unknown and really go for things, I think like the universe conspires in some way to help you. And I think people respond to you in a different way, because all of us admire people who take risks. We admire people who go for it. And when we see people who go for it, we want to help them. And I think all of those things came together for me in that moment when I was 27 years old in New York City. And it's one of my, it might be, of all of the stories I have from my career as an actor, which was a long career, and I got to work with amazing people, Academy Award winning actors and directors and producers, and I had success on hit TV shows, all of that, all the parties, all the fun. I think that story is my favorite story from my acting career. And I'll say one other thing. The chase is the most exciting part of it. When I look back on it, it's not the success. It's the willingness to go after it, right? It's the climbing of the mountain. That's the fun. Getting to the top feels good, but how long do you actually stay at the top of the mountain once you climb it? You stay there for a couple of minutes, you take in the view, you climb down, and you start thinking about the next mountain. So it's really important to focus on the journey and let yourself have fun with that. And that's also where the unknown is. You don't know what's going to happen. And if you're willing to tolerate that, if you're willing to relax into the unknown and trust that something is working in your favor, I think things almost always, they always work out for you miraculously. It may not be what you had in mind. It may not be exactly how you imagined. You may not get exactly what you thought you wanted, but you're always going to get something. And usually that thing that you get is even greater than what you could possibly imagine. And that's what happened for me. I never imagined that I was going to have the career that I did. I couldn't have conceived it in my mind. It was just one step at a time. And yeah, it's just a story about trust. It's a story about faith and finding and trusting that innermost wisdom, that innermost instinct. So that's my story.